I grew up in a white farmhouse at the edge of a cornfield in rural Iowa. This was the early 60s, when morning started long before the sun thought about rising. No alarm clock needed. Mom's soup did the waking, better than any rooster ever dreamed of. That smell could wake the dead, and most mornings it woke my brother before it woke the chickens. Mom would say with a soft voice, "Morning already? Didn't I just tuck you in yesterday?" That soup wasn't fancy. We weren't poor, just running on that special budget called life. It was whatever we had: potatoes from the cellar, carrots from the garden, sometimes a chicken if Sunday went well. But that pot made our kitchen feel like the center of the universe. Even when the Iowa wind rattled the windows, that soup whispered everything would be all right. Mom used to say while stirring, "Sweetheart, bad times have a way of running out of gas before good hearts do." Back then, I didn't get it. Flew right over my head. But years later, when I'd smell onions sizzling in butter, I'd hear her voice again, clear as a church bell. Mom had this way of laughing at her own cooking. She'd shake her head and say, "Well, it's not Betty Crocker, but it'll keep us alive." And you know what? We lived on soup, laughter, and the wild hope that one day we could buy real butter. One winter morning stands out. Snow so deep that school got canceled. My brother and I were thrilled until hunger hit. Mom opened the cupboard and shook her head. "We're running low," she said. Then she smiled. "But we've got enough for soup. Half an onion, 2 potatoes, and a can of tomatoes from who knows when." Dad came in from the cold, snow melting in his hair, and declared, "Best soup in Iowa." Mom laughed out loud. "Iowa, please at least give Nebraska a chance." We laughed so hard our breath made little clouds in that chilly kitchen. When I was 10, I tried to help, wanted to prove I was grown up. Mom let me chop carrots, and I was so proud until I nicked my finger. Started crying, more from embarrassment than pain. Mom just wrapped it gently and said with a knowing smile, "Every cook gets a battle scar or two. You're official now." That tiny cut? My first kitchen diploma. Still the most expensive degree I ever earned. Those mornings taught me something. Mom wasn't just making soup. She was building home, one ladleful at a time. The 1960s were tough for farming families. The Sears catalog was our shopping mall. But our parents got up every morning anyway. They helped build the best parts of this country, one calloused hand and one prayer at a time. Mom ran that kitchen like mission control. Her apron was her armor. Never complained. Just kept going, kept loving, kept making that soup. From a small town to New York. When I graduated high school in 1971, I had big dreams and small savings. My parents scraped together enough for State University. I remember telling them over dinner, "Mom, Dad, I want to go to college." Dad stared at his coffee a long time. Then Mom took my hand and said, "Of course you do, sweetheart. You're smart as a whip. Go make something of yourself." Day I left, I cried in the bus bathroom so nobody would see. The city just smelled wrong. Too much gas, not enough soup. I called Mom every Sunday, reversing the charges because long distance cost a fortune. I'd tell her about classes, roommates, how strange everything was. One Sunday I asked her, "Mom, how do you make that soup taste like hope?" She laughed. "Add a little salt and a lot of faith, honey." I smiled. "Faith doesn't come in a can, Mom." She laughed harder. "If it did, I'd buy it by the case." We both laughed so hard I spilled instant ramen all over my desk. I lived on coffee and instant noodles. If salt counted as a college credit, I'd be a doctor by now. College was harder than expected. 2 part-time jobs, just to survive. But I graduated. 4 years later, walked across that stage with my parents crying and beaming. After graduation, got a job at a small firm in Des Moines. Wasn't much, but it was a start. Worked late, learned everything, slowly moved up. Then in 1978, a New York City firm wanted to interview me. New York might as well have been the moon. But I went and somehow got the job. Called Mom from a payphone in Grand Central Station. "Mom, they want me." Her voice came through thick with emotion. "Of course they do, baby. Go show them what an Iowa girl can do." Moving to New York was like landing on another planet. My first place in Queens was so tiny I could wash dishes, fold laundry, and watch the news, all without moving. I felt rich. Until I met New York rent, worked 12-hour days, ate microwave meals, missed home like crazy. But I kept going. After 5 years, started my own design studio. Just me and one other person in a cramped midtown office. First year was terrifying. Some months couldn't make rent, but mom's words echoed in my head. Bad times run out of gas before good hearts do. So I kept showing up. By the mid-1980s, my studio had grown. Real clients, nice office, employees, making enough to send money home. Finally, could bring mom to New York, her first plane ticket ever. When she stepped off that plane, looking terrified and amazed, I burst into tears. She hugged me tight and said, "Well, look at you. High heels, big dreams, and no idea where to park." I wiped my eyes. "I still burn toast, Mom." She laughed. "Burn the soup, kiddo, and I'm taking back your birth certificate." That week was magical. Empire State Building, Central Park, Brooklyn Bridge. She asked me one afternoon, "Do people here ever stop honking?" I grinned. Sure, when they run out of gas or patience. But what she loved most was my office. She stood there, tears rolling down, and said softly, "You really did it, honey. See, I told your father you'd outgrow that stubborn streak." On her last night, I made soup for her. First time trying her recipe, my hands shook. Didn't taste exactly like hers, hard to compete with 40 years of love simmered in. But when she tasted it, she closed her eyes and whispered, "It tastes like you, honey, and that's even better." We laughed until my downstairs neighbor banged on the ceiling, sat in my tiny kitchen eating soup till midnight, and for those hours, we were back in Iowa with wind rattling the windows. The soup returns. My mother is 83 now, lives in a nice assisted living place near my brother in Iowa. Dad passed in 2010. I visit every few weeks, flying back from New York. And every time, I bring ingredients to make soup. These days, Mom keeps losing her glasses. Half the time, they're sitting right on top of her head. Sometimes she calls me by my aunt's name. Sometimes tells me the same story 3 times. The doctors call it dementia. I just call it time playing tricks. Won't get better. But here's the thing. When I make that soup, when the smell fills her apartment, something happens. She closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and smiles. Smells like home," she says softly. I take her hand. "Yes, Mom, it is home." We sit together and eat soup, just like Iowa. In those moments, time folds back. I can see the farmhouse kitchen, curtains fluttering, sunlight on the table, and life as simple as a bowl of soup with someone you love. Mom's generation built this country with their bare hands, worked jobs that wore out their bodies, and believed their children would have it better. They were the quiet kind of heroes. No parades, no headlines, just hard work. Sometimes I look out my Manhattan window at all those buildings, and I realize every bit was built by people like Mom. People who believed hard work and kindness could make tomorrow better. The other day, Mom was struggling to remember, kept asking who I was, fear in her eyes. So I made soup, stood in her kitchen, chopping and humming like she used to. As the smell filled the room, I saw her relax. I said softly, "Mom, you did it. You made it better." She looked at me, recognition sparking. "Did I, honey?" I squeezed her hand. "Yes, Mom, you really did." She smiled, that same warm smile I've known since I was 5. "Well, don't let the soup get cold." I laughed through tears. "Never, Mom." Someday she calls me that nice soup lady. Honestly, that's a promotion. I'll take it. Her memory drifts a little, but her kindness never goes anywhere. Last week she said to me, "You know, what made it special wasn't what was in it. It was who was there." I squeezed her hand. "I know, Mom. That generation gave us everything they had, and then some. Built this nation with grit, grace, and gallons of homemade soup. Now, as they grow older, as memories fade, it's our turn to remember for them. Tell their stories, honor their sacrifices. So I keep making that soup, every visit. And each time, I'm keeping alive a tradition, a memory, a love spanning generations. saying thank you the only way I know how. Last week, eating soup together, Mom looked at me with those blue eyes that aren't quite as sharp. She said with a smile, "You always were my good girl, even when you stole the last biscuit." I started crying, which made her laugh. "Oh, honey, it's just soup." But we both knew it wasn't just soup, it was everything. I whispered, "The soup's perfect, Mom." She patted my hand. "Love always is, sweetheart. Love always is." Thank you for listening today. If this touched your heart, please subscribe, leave a like, and share this with someone you love. If you've ever had a meal that reminded you of home, tell me about it in the comments. Your story might just be someone's soup tonight. Maybe tonight, whip up a little soup of your own. Pour some love into it. Share it with someone who matters. Stay blessed and honor the hands that built this country with steady hands and soup that tasted like home.